Welcome to another week of Apologetics. We are on week 24, I've been corrected. And we have a new question. That's a really fun question and not controversial at all, guys. Just kidding. Every question we ask is controversial. Our question today is, should Christians support the death penalty?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, question to you. We live in Washington. Does Washington have the death penalty? Capital punishment.
Maybe.
Yes? No?
It's almost a trick question.
I'm pretty sure they don't.
If you massacre a whole city,
If you massacre a whole city.
You should probably get jail for life.
So in Washington State, right now, we used to have the death penalty. And then for a long time, the death penalty was just on hold. And then I think 2018, the Supreme Court voted to remove the death penalty from America.
The Washington Supreme Court?
The Washington Supreme Court. I printed out a map, but I don't think I ever grabbed it. What do you think? Raise your hand if you think the majority of U.S. states have the death penalty.
I have no clue.
Raise your hand if you think the minority. I messed up. The most don't have the death penalty. I think they don't, but I can't remember now.
It's actually surprisingly most states I think have about.
is that term?
Don't they have that thing where you get your one last supper and then they
Death
kill you?
penalty. Define terms. Death penalty.
I had a cool picture of how many states don't have it. So I believe that the majority do have it, actually. Here's a picture. The red states, that's not big. The red states do have the death penalty.
Oh my
The
goodness.
blue states do not.
Let me see.
We're the minority.
Why don't we have the death penalty?
First our governor put it on pause for a long time.
Like said it still exists, but I'm going to not allow.
So there's
any
people on death
execution.
row that were just waiting. And they're like,
To die?
Yes.
essentially. So it's called death row. Sometimes it takes a long time. Thankfully, it's actually a good thing. So capital punishment. Okay, let's define our terms because we're getting into it now. So the define terms: death penalty, the punishment of execution administered to someone legally convicted of a capital crime. What is a capital crime? Any guesses on what things in America could someone be given capital punishment for? What kind of crimes? Micah?
Like purposeful murder?
Purposeful murder, exactly. So, and some people distinguish pre-planned, right? And actually the Bible has a distinction on premeditated, right? Henry, do you want to add anything? Any other crimes you think that have capital punishment? Andrew? Selling nuclear secrets to Russia, which is what Jalen said would be treason. I don't think so. I believe only murder.
People get sent to are kind of dumb.
I believe only murder can have the death penalty in America. I don't, as of this point, the states that have the death penalty, it has to be murder and murder only. Yeah, Henry?
Genocide?
Genocide would be murder of lots of people, so that would fall in. You're right. So, but I'm saying murder and murder of maybe multiple people
Here we
would
go.
fall under it.
Crimes that are punishable by death are known as capital crimes. Capital offenses are capital felonies and they vary depending on jurisdiction, but commonly include serious offenses such as murder, mass murder, aggravated cases of rape, child abuse, fill in the blank, terrorism, treason, espionage, sedition? What's sedition? So there's actually a long list. There's things that people consider so bad.
But they would vary by state to state.
Right.
So those are some of the things that are possible capital punishments, right?
Capital crimes.
So, okay, let's define capital punishment, just because we're using that words a lot. The legal killing of someone as a punishment for a crime. And then, so October 2018, Washington made it, ruled it unconstitutional. So, in the last person killed for their crimes, capital punishment in Washington was in 2010. Carl Brown.
What are you dying
Hal
for?
Coburn Brown.
Oh,
What did he die for?
I don't know. Murder, I think. Any guesses on how many things?
What was his last meal? That's what I really want.
Yeah, what is his last meal?
Chicken
So we were talking about death row. So basically, our government's our crime legal system really does do a careful job. Any states that do commit someone to capital punishment, it takes a long time. And this is a good thing, right? Because they don't want to falsely kill anyone. And this is actually part of the conversation is, can we know for sure? Like, do we want to commit capital punishment to someone and then find out evidence that they didn't do it? Like, you have to be absolutely sure. And it takes a long time. So people are on death row for a long time. It's like people who are waiting to be killed. And so the people on death row now, I believe in Washington, are just in prison for life.
Well, death row doesn't exist anymore.
I guess not. But there were people like waiting because it was on hold. Even though there was like 11 people.
Did they get killed or no?
No, so they didn't. So there was just people waiting, and then capital punishment was on hold in Washington, and then I guess now they're just in prison for life. So that's one of the factors. Can we know for sure? And I think the legal system should be absolutely sure. Because if you put someone in jail for 10 years and then find evidence, you can release them. That if they didn't find evidence they didn't do it, you can release them. But if you've killed them, you can't do anything about it.
Can I talk about an unjust case in the past to bring light to this?
Sure.
So during some of the bigger times of the Black Lives Matter movement and people starting to share about racism in America, there was a case that was brought up from maybe the early 1900s about this like 13-year-old black boy who was convicted of murdering a white woman after they found her body on the side of the road. And he was like a young boy, and he denied it all. But someone said they saw him, and the jury said, let's do it. And he was like executed. He was tried as an adult, and he was executed.
As a 13-year-old?
As a 13-year-old.
Wow.
And he was killed he was put to the death penalty within weeks, if not months. I'm going to be a little bit rough here. And they have finally now, like said, that wasn't a fair trial. He shouldn't have been tried that way. There was literally not enough evidence. This is one of the big injustices in our system. So our system has been reformed over the years in the right ways, that we give them you have the right to a retrial or a right to, what's the right word? When you ask
to appeal.
appeal. So
To a higher court.
Because people unjustly have executed people or unfairly or without proper evidence, and he has now been exonerated, like literally.
Wow.
So it's a Wikipedia, I should find his name. So it's just so challenging.
Yeah.
That you cannot, if you have an unfair treatment or an unfair system or an unfair government, people are going to be
Henry.
mistreated.
Wouldn't the person killing the person be a murderer too?
Interesting.
No, they have
No.
the right to do.
So killing is different than murder, right? If you can kill something without murdering them. Yes, Trini.
Don't they don't they use like a pear or something?
Yeah, there's different ways. I mean, in history.
So
So hanging. I mean, Jesus was capitally punished on the cross. That was how the Romans did it. Hanging was a way that in our country for a long time. Lethal injection is probably the most common one now, which they they just inject you with poison essentially that kills you. And then the electric chair where it electrocutes you to death was also a way. So
Has someone ever lived through the shot?
Yes.
through the lethal injection?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I haven't researched that. So let's get on to some of our challenges. This is why this is a challenging topic, okay? First of all, the Old Testament. So this is apologetics. We ask tough questions and go to the Bible for answers. The Old Testament, does it support the death penalty or not?
Yes.
Yes. I was going to ask guesses. There are 35 different crimes listed in the Old Testament that people can be capitally punished for. 35. Some of them are murder, kidnapping, bestiality, adultery, homosexuality, being a false prophet, prostitution, rape, and other crimes. So there's many, many things that could incur capital punishment in the Old Testament, okay? So that's one thing. The Old Testament supports it. Remember we spent some time on what do we do with Old Testament laws? So are they civil, are they moral, or are they temple laws, or do we have a different word for that? Ceremonial laws? No. Yeah.
Ceremonial.
and we really decided that just the moral laws, like they say murder is wrong. The country of Israel is not our country, so we're not under those civil laws. So this would be how this is, the Bible, when we look at the Old Testament on this issue, is going to tell us that murder is wrong, right? But we're not in the country of Israel, so we don't necessarily fall under the specific way that crimes are punished. That's a civil law. So we live in America, specifically Washington State, so we fall under those, our country's laws for this, on this issue, okay? But as we talk about should we support it in our country, it comes into play. Here's another challenge. Jesus was given the death penalty, okay? That's just interesting. Again, what I just said, it's the law of the land. As Americans, we have the opportunity to vote on this issue. It may come to us for a vote. So, we can say, oh, we just follow the law of the land, so whatever the law is. But what if we have the opportunity given to us to vote on? What if it shows up on a ballot when you guys are 18? Should Washington have the death penalty? How should you vote as a Christian? How should you vote biblically? This is what we're going to focus on, right? I think we're all going to land on an agreement that the law of the land should stand, that capital punishment, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah. But, we may have the opportunity to vote on this issue. Another challenge, life in prison versus the death penalty, right? We could say, basically, if death penalty is not legal, like in Washington, life in prison would be usually the option given to someone who does one of these terrible, terrible crimes like murder. Is that a deterrent enough? Think about that. So the deterrence issue, does having capital punishment keep people from murdering? Like in a state like Texas where there's capital punishment, do people murder less there than a state that doesn't have capital punishment? Can you compare those things? Can you give it a value that people would be afraid to die and so less likely to commit that crime? Like, is that a factor? Because if it deters people from doing it, then it's probably a good thing, right? If we can stop murders by having a stronger punishment, when your parents are like, if you do that, you don't get a cookie, versus like, if you do that, you're grounded for 2 weeks, and I'm taking away your phone, and I'm fining you $1 million. Like if the punishment escalates, does it deter people from doing the crime, kind of thing, right? I think we'd all agree that the ultimate punishment for a crime would be capital punishment. Your life is over. There's no hope. It's just done.
I added a bullet because we talked about it.
Oh, the cost of insurrection, like the incarceration. So the cost of the society. It costs a lot of money to keep someone in prison. We have to feed them. We have to house them. Pay for guards. Pay for walls.
And we have to allow them the right to appeal.
Yeah, and the court system, right?
And a retrial.
So is that a factor?
Lawyers are expensive.
Is that a factor that we should consider? Like, well, we could just kill this person. We wouldn't have to pay to feed them for the rest of their lives. Like that's a pretty kind of a selfish choice in this question, but it's part of it.
But it's like it is a big weight on our system. It's our tax.
One last meal costs a lot less than feeding someone for the rest of their life and keeping them in prison.
Except that one guy ordered 37 pockets of KFC.
I researched this a little bit.
Yeah.
And, I came across some sources that said death penalty costs 3 times more than life in prison.
Interesting. Because of all the legal things?
Yeah, because of all the legal trials.
The shot.
Interesting. That's an interesting factor.
Oh, okay, cool.
Good insight. Hey, feel free to chime in if you come across more stuff that you've researched. So, those are some of the challenges to this issue, I think, that make this an interesting, tough topic. Let's look at the Bible for some of what the Bible says about this issue. Who can read Exodus 21:12-14? Maya, Exodus 21:12-14. Just go right on the board. Who wants to read Matthew 5:38 and 39? Ellie. Who wants to read John 8:7? Addie. Who wants to read 2 Peter 3:9? Caitlin. Who wants to read Genesis 9:6? Jalen. And one last one. Who wants to read Romans 13 verse 1? Trevor. Okay. So these are some, you see some Old Testament, some New Testament perspectives. Romans 13:1's on the next page.
No, 9:6 and another 6. Is it just 6 or is it 6?
It's 9:6.
Okay.
When I copy pasted, the 6 showed up again. Okay, let's see what these verses say regarding this issue. Who had Exodus? Maya did. Exodus 21, 12 to 14.
Whoever strikes a man so that he die shall be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he may flee. But if a man willing to attack another man to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar, and he may die.
So this was interesting because it's specific to. Did you guys catch it? First of all, if someone strikes a person down, kills them, they should be what? What should happen to them according to this verse? They should be put to death. But there's a little clause in here.
In the middle.
What's the clause? If they do it, if they didn't lie in wait for them,
Which is like an intentional premeditation.
like, I'm going to kill Micah as he goes down the stairs, right? Versus Micah and I were in a fight and we got really mad at each other and I accidentally killed him in like the fight, in the heat of the moment, right? That's called, versus, we talked about a little bit, premeditated murder and, I don't know, accidental murder. I don't know if it's accidental. And that's, we call that manslaughter. Manslaughter is non-intentional, right? You can do vehicular manslaughter. So if Mike and you can go to jail, it is punishable, but it's not as bad as premeditated murder.
There's a man in our area who just got sentenced to 6.5 years in jail. He's a father of 5 because it was vehicular manslaughter. He turned left on a dark night right after a car passed, and he turned left, but right behind the car was a motorcyclist, and he killed the motorcyclist. So accident, 6.5 years in prison.
Wow.
Why?
I was in a car accident. I was in a car accident when I was 15 where someone died. The driver of the car, her sister died, and she was convicted of manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter. She didn't do prison, but she was convicted of manslaughter and had like community service and other things. So even, it could be someone in your own car because it was at your hand, right? That's manslaughter versus murder, right? That's how we distinguish.
I just want to say, I looked it up and it says the most comprehensive study in the county found that, for the country, found that the death penalty costs in North Carolina costs $2.16 million for execution.
Wow.
Over the cost of sentencing murderers to life imprisonment.
Oh, 2.16 million more.
Yeah.
That supports what Andrew said. Yeah, interesting.
Exodus
is saying, there's a difference between premeditated murder and not, right? Does that make sense? Interesting, even Exodus distinguishes. We got to keep moving. Sorry. Matthew 5. Who had that? Ellie. Matthew 5, 38, 39.
You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also.
So this is kind of, let's bring in a New Testament perspective on this issue. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? The punishment should fit the crime. You kill someone, you get killed. You steal from someone, you have to pay it back. Kind of like, did any of your parents try to do like equal punishment? Like, I don't know, spanking, right? You hit your sister, you get spanked. Those are like, punishment fits the crime. In Arabic countries, if you steal, they cut off your hand. Because then you can't steal anymore.
If you poke someone's eye out, they poke your eye out.
Eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, right? But Jesus is saying, no. I'm saying, in the new covenant where we forgive, where we give grace, where we have mercy, like a new command I give you, this is the new covenant. If someone slaps you in the cheek, turn to him your other also. Change your mindset. Don't try to get revenge. So this doesn't completely apply to a law situation, but this is insight into the New Testament way of thinking, where salvation is available for all, where we should forgive, where a God who has forgiven us of much, we should also forgive. So that kind of, that's a different way of thinking than the Old Testament. Who has John 8:7?
I do.
Annie.
And they continued to ask him, and he stood up and said to them, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And
So
Jesus is saying this.
yes, so Jesus is saying this is where people try to trick Jesus into, will he enforce the Old Testament law? So basically, at this time, Jesus' time, the Romans wouldn't let the Jews inflict capital punishment. They were not allowed to do it. That is why the Jews had to go to the Romans to get Jesus killed. You know that whole story, the Easter story? They go to Pilate and they go to Herod, and the Jewish council, if they could just kill him, they would have. But they couldn't. So they were trying to get the Romans to do it. They had to convince the Romans to do it. So this was a time where they were trying to trick Jesus, right? And so they bring a woman who's caught in adultery. Where's the man who's caught in adultery in this story? I don't know. But the woman who's caught in adultery, and they are asking Jesus, should we stone her to death? They're kind of trying to trick him into either getting in trouble with the Romans, or is he going to really follow the Bible? Like, that's what they're trying to entrap him with. Of course, Jesus has a third answer that always outsmarts them. He challenges everyone. He who is without the first stone, so without sin, casts the first stone, right? If any of you are perfect, you be the first one to throw the stone at her, to stone her to death, right? And it's kind of showing, again, Jesus' attitude and heart to it. Like, all of us are guilty. All of us are sinners. All of us, and there's none of us who are perfect. So are any of us able to say that we're better than anyone else and that we could stand it perfect and say that person should die? Jesus, everyone slowly walked away because they realized they weren't perfect enough to execute this woman for her crimes, for her sins. So, interesting into that. 2 Peter 3:9, who had that? Caitlin.
The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance.
We actually read this verse in the context of predestination and free will last couple weeks. But I threw this in here because it's kind of like an idea I think about is, if we end someone's life, are we ending their chance to repent? Are we ending their chance to turn to God and change their ways? We're ending their opportunity. If we put them in prison for life, do they get a chance to repent and turn to God? Like, that's kind of like my question here. Now, interestingly enough, in the light of predestination, God knows whether they'll turn or not, and they will turn before they die, right? If you're on that side of things. But thinking about this specific issue, and in our country where we may have a chance to vote on it, I think maybe that should be our hope, is that people will turn to Jesus. Even murderers can be forgiven. Jesus dies for murderers. Murderers, Jesus' death on the cross can cover the sin of murder. There is no sin too great for Jesus' blood to cover. So if we really believe that, we should believe also that murderers can turn to Jesus, put faith in Jesus, and be in heaven with us. And that's kind of a shocking thing, right? Because murder is terrible. And we think that maybe murderers shouldn't go to heaven. But there is room in God's kingdom. There's room in Jesus' forgiveness, even for murderers. And God is patient. He wants all to be saved. So should we just give them the time rather than ending their life? Yes?
What if someone purposely ran into the road and hit a car?
Runs into the road?
That's considered like suicide.
That's vehicular suicide or
But what
something.
if you got in trouble for it?
You might, and you'd have to, the legal system would have to discover the truth.
You got brakes. You can
No.
stop.
I get a dash cam.
No, they ran into your jurisdiction.
Yeah, dash cam would help. Okay. Genesis 9:6. Who had Genesis 9:6? Did
Oh, yeah.
Jalen have it? Yeah.
If anyone takes a human life, that person's life will also be taken by human hands. For God made human beings in his own image.
So, first of all, this verse also reiterates the value of human life being made in God's image, and that's why murder is, I think, the main one big thing that we should be talking about for this crime, and it escalates it to, and it says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man his blood shall be shed, for God made man in his own image. So basically, God is giving not only, a lot of times we say, well, isn't vengeance the Lord's? Like, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But he puts this task in our hands to decide the fate of a human who does this, in Genesis here, and gives us this responsibility, right? And for the shedding of blood. Interesting, I was just thinking about Cain and Abel. Did God kill Cain after he murdered Abel?
Yeah.
No. I just thought that was interesting. He sends him away. So God didn't give capital punishment to Cain. Okay, one last one. Romans 13:1. I think Trevor had it.
Yes. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God.
This is a verse that's getting thrown around a lot as we disagree with our government on things. But God has put our governing authorities in place. Those governing authorities are under his authority. Also into the predestination issues. God is in control, even of who is in office, even if they seemingly are evil. It is part of God's plan. He either allowed it or caused it to happen. And we need to trust our governing authorities and follow what they say. And this is a civil matter, right? The moral matter here is murder is wrong. But the civil matter, like our laws and of the country, is what should be done to a murderer that's convicted, right? Should they be killed? Should they be put in prison? It is a civil matter. So this verse is telling me that we should obey our government on this issue, right? Yes, Mike Henry.
We should launch them in a rocket and see if they survive.
We should do weird experimental testings on them, right?
Or we should have a man-made island that we send all the prisoners to.
Yeah.
And start
Australia.
Alcatraz.
Ooh, that too. No, did you know Australia? We used to ship prisoners to Australia.
I know.
Yeah, and Britain did too.
Wait,
Yeah.
Wait, just make a big parking lot that's 10 miles by 10 miles wide in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it's guarded by helicopters 24/7.
Perfect. Hawaii. Just send them all to Hawaii. They can't swim.
Yeah.
What?
Okay.
No.
So,
But then how are we
what
gonna
do you
make it a
think?
Beautiful place.
I know, right?
We have all these verses.
That's not smart. We make a man-made island
Okay.
that will sink in 20
Antarctica. Just send them all to Antarctica.
They're gonna die anyway.
They're gonna.
We can teach them how to live there.
What
Okay.
if we try to like witness to them and reform them and share Jesus with them?
We build an underwater jail and send them there.
So our friend Billy Churdlin is a missionary in Alaska, and he's a bush pilot. So he has one of those small planes, the kind that go in and out of Linden Airport. And one of his ministries right now is visiting the jail and doing Bible studies. And when the prisoners are released for their crimes, he tries to incorporate them back into this camp in the wilderness, this lodge. And he has them work at the lodge and stay at the lodge. And he's trying to rehabilitate them and have them have a changed heart, changed mind. You know, so he's sharing with prisoners to try to reform them and have them know Jesus.
Oh, you wrote that whole thing?
Yeah, it was long and it was in there.
Yeah, it was just for me to reference. Good
Oh.
job.
That's not the answer.
I already referenced it too. That's not the. That's the
No, it's
answer.
not the answer. Short answer is why
It's not the answer?
You wrote that.
I thought you were right.
I can't believe you wrote that whole thing.
Right, it was in there.
Yeah, I wanted to read it. And I already read it.
Yeah.
I don't have
No, I put it in short answer and why.
It's not the short answer.
How dare you?
Okay.
I don't think that's a short answer. That's a long
Woo.
answer.
Sorry, Brian. Okay, I'm.
All right, what do you guys think? Should Christians, well, this is what it comes down to, right? We're not making the laws. So I think it's pretty clear that we don't, get
I think
to.
everybody has their own opinion.
I don't think this is something that we should be advocating for, even either way. Like we shouldn't demand the death penalty of our government, and we shouldn't maybe fight against the death penalty. I'm kind of landing somewhere in the middle. But what do you guys think? If it came to a vote for us, right? This isn't something that we're campaigning for, petitioning for, but if it came to a vote, if it went to the people, should Washington State have the death penalty? How would you vote? Would you vote yes, we should have the death penalty, or no, we should have the death penalty?
Both of it so it ruins the machine.
I would say no.
Okay, raise your hand.
Let's raise it. Let's do a little mock vote. Is that clear? Should we in Washington support the death penalty or not have the death penalty? Raise your hand if you think we should have the death penalty. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Raise your hand if you think we should not have the death penalty. 1, 2, 3. Matthew, you're voting for 5, 6,
Matthew voted for
10,
both,
11,
so you
12.
roll like him.
Okay. Well, right. So right here, not having the death penalty would win if it was to a vote. Why? Who? If you voted for the death penalty, someone tell me why you voted for the death penalty.
Why I would vote for the death penalty is because some people commit such heinous crimes and they show no remorse for anything they've ever done at all and show no signs of turning to God or turning to be good at all anytime soon.
And so they should be removed from our society. Okay.
And put in Russia.
Put in Russia. No, he was for the death penalty. So that's not excommunication or anything. Okay, if someone who voted against the death penalty, why would you vote against the death penalty?
Makes sense.
Bradley.
Because everybody can have a second chance.
Everyone should have a second chance. Okay. Addison.
If they're not a Christian, they can still have the chance to become a Christian. If they do die, they go to heaven.
If they're not a Christian, they could have a chance to become a Christian. Andrew, did you have one?
Yeah, I was just because it's so expensive.
It's so expensive. Nice.
I love it. I love it.
It's more expensive than keeping them in prison for life. That surprises me. I would think like just end it, it'd be over, right? That's interesting.
Well, it depends how old you are.
Henry.
If you're like
Do they get to
16,
go
you're
bathroom before they die?
gonna be
Do
a
they get to go to the bathroom before they die? I'm sure they do.
Assume so.
Yeah, we have laws about treating prisoners and prisoners of war nicely and carefully. Yes.
Is Mr. Chesman still in high school? No? Okay, so my English teacher,
No, he retired.
I was a junior and I had to write a paper. This is what I wrote my paper on. It was death penalty. And I felt like there was two reasons I was against it. The first one was that I felt like it was God should determine life and death. And coming from the look of the new covenant and like we want to extend grace, that was one of my reasons. My second reason was I felt like if I couldn't be the one to execute something, like if it was my job to program the computer to give or if I was the nurse that had to administer the drug,
Flip the
if I had
switch.
to flip the switch for love, I couldn't do it. So I felt like if I couldn't do it, my personal stance was that I had to be against it. That was just me trying to think through in my head, like if
And you're not saying the people who flip the switch are murderers.
No, I just knew that
right.
my heart couldn't.
You're
do
saying
that,
it
so
would
I
be
had to
hard on you
against it.
personally. And because that got brought up, like aren't the people who actually pull the lever or whatever, you know how the executioners in the old days like would wear a mask, like a face covering?
Yes.
They
doctors were
why would they do that? It's to protect their identity. They're not supposed to be a human. They're not going to be responsible for that act. They just have to carry out the thing. So the person flipping the switch, they're doing it justly under the laws, and it's not murder. I guess it's killing, but we all killed a turkey to have Thanksgiving. Like that's the difference between killing and murder, right?
Also,
Murder is unjust, killing is just.
And one is like an animal.
Right.
Whoa.
Okay, what about war? Okay, is when you're in a war and you're shooting back and forth and you kill someone, is that murder?
No, if you're yeah.
No, it's not murder. It's actually just. I mean, and it's in. How is that just? It's self-defense, I guess. It goes down to that line, but war is another thing of self-defense. Like, what if you're attacking? But no, it's in wartime. It's within. Your government told you to do it. Just because your government tells you to do it doesn't mean you should.
Is this
But
a typo? However, capital payment is a just penalty, or do you mean
punishment.
Okay.
Okay, here's where I landed. And you can write this down and you can say you disagree with it. I think this is an issue where I like to see that you guys are split on it because you're thinking about it. I think there's not a very strong biblical answer here as far as should we vote for it or not. But I landed on no, we shouldn't support the death penalty. Like if it came to us on a vote, I would vote against it because we're in this new covenant time. Because we have the opportunity for grace and salvation to come to everyone. Salvation is available to all. So that person on death row could be saved. That person could turn to Jesus. I want to give them time to turn to Jesus. I don't want to take away that chance. Now, if you believe in predestination, like they'll choose before they die regardless, because God's timing, irresistible grace, it'll happen or it won't happen. But I want to give them that time. And then I say, however, capital punishment is a just penalty for the taking of human life. I don't think it's wrong. I don't think it's morally wrong to enact capital punishment. So that's why I think I would vote against it if it came to me as a vote, but it's never something I would campaign for. It's never something I would hold a sign for, like stop capital punishment or start capital punishment. Like I wouldn't go out there and do that. I would follow the laws of my land on this because I believe it is a civil matter and I'm okay with the country that is going to do it. I want them to do it justly. I want them to take the time. I don't want them to do it wrong. That's something I don't want them to mess up. I don't want people to be in prison for life for a wrong reason
Right, like
either.
Jesus had an unjust trial.
Right.
Right? Jesus was unjustly subject to capital
Like
punishment.
that guy that was on American Got Talent, he served 30 years in prison, and then they found him not guilty.
Right. Yeah.
He was sentenced to life, and then they found him not guilty after 30 years.
And
they
we
had-
are at an age with technology and DNA evidence where our crime solving is getting better. So that could be an argument for we're going to have less mistakes because like cold cases, old crimes are getting even redone. Like we just found a murderer in our county that had been unsolved for like 30 years.
Yeah, he was a Fran's bakery driver.
Yeah. And
He was a Fran's outlet right
they
there in
found
Hollywood.
or they had new equipment for DNA and they were able to there was a young girl who was walking her dog who was murdered by the river like 30 years ago. And they actually found the guy and tried him and found him guilty.
Because there was evidence on her body that they'd had in and even like they said, the police work back then was so good at the way they collected evidence and they stored it away in their files,
Yeah.
like that they actually had DNA from that many years ago. It's really cool.
So I think, you know, we are at an age where the DNA evidence, we can be pretty sure about this. But yeah, I think it's a just thing. Murder is terribly wrong, the worst crime you can commit, essentially. And our country should make wise decisions on this. Okay, thanks.